All right, everybody. So, you guys love when I have to torture myself with a segment, right? You guys love when I have to do that, I assume, because you guys watch those segments like none other. You watch them a lot. And this is going to be another one of those, because once again, it would seem that I'm being forced, by circumstance, into rooting for Hasan Piker in a debate. Just like recently when he went on to Piers Morgan with one based person and a group of degenerates to argue about Israel versus Palestine, and Hasan was one of the only two people on there that wasn't literally a soulless ghoul husk. And so you know that, like, we're dealing with some pretty awful people, or at least some pretty awful takes in politics, if I'm being forced to agree with Hasan, and certainly if I'm being forced to root for Hasan. And that's happening once again today, because apparently, after a steamy exchange on Twitter, by that I mean angry, not homoerotic, between Hasan and Asmongold, they have decided to get together on Discord and have a debate. A 2-hour and 32-minute debate, if I might clarify. We'll see how much of this I can bear to fucking watch. We'll see. But Asmongold and Hasan debated on the topic of the campus protests. Now, I do have a plan later in the stream to do a full dedicated segment about the campus protests and the cracking down on them, and how overall I don't agree with it, though I do think there has been some kind of pointless misinfo spreading on like the pro-Palestine side about the protests. It's just like there's no reason to do it because it doesn't change anything. But I think it's important to make sure that everybody's messaging is like in line with what is provably true from like videos and photo evidence and main like news reporting and whatnot. And so we're gonna do a whole dedicated segment about it and the crackdown. But Hasan and Asmongold had a debate about it, and my understanding is that Hasan, obviously very in favor of the protests. I think he was there at the campus like a couple days ago or whatever. Asmongold, on the other hand, is like a very weird brand of politics. I really don't know. I really don't know what I would describe his politics as, but the most I could really say is useful idiot for people on the far right. Lately, he's spent a lot of his time just uploading React videos boosting Rev Says Desu, the like alt-right lolicon YouTuber who's talking about like anti-woke stuff, and he's gotten really into the anti-woke things. Apparently, Asmongold's editor is a Nazi. There are a few bits of evidence for that, particularly a lot of his video titles, descriptions, and thumbnails as of late. Most notably, one of the most recent. It was actually me who posted this, and it got a fair amount of traction after I posted it, which is surprising, because I'm shadow banned on Twitter, so somebody pretty big must have retweeted it. Because this is one of my bigger tweets in a long time since I got shadow banned. But here it is. I simply said Jesus Christ, and it's Elon unbanned a white supremacist, quote-unquote, mildly right-leaning political commentator Nick Fuentes gets unbanned on Twitter. Yeah, I think Asmongold's guy might be pretty far right. He did end up changing it, though, as it turns out. I guess after getting called out, and I figured he would have to do this. And it's now called Elon's most controversial unban. Totally not far-right political commentator Nick Fuentes gets unbanned on Twitter. Dude. The backpedal. Do you think that guy's still Asmongold's editor? Anyway. Asmongold, typically, when he talks about politics, he is a very... God, what is the best way to describe it? His thought process pretty much amounts to, that sounds about right to me. Does that make sense to you guys? You ever run into the kind of guy who's just like, you suggest some like data or research on a topic and they're like, all skeptical. But if you make an argument that just sounds sort of like correct intuitively, they'll say, think about it or sounds about right to me, and they just like buy it up. Like if it compels them on a common sense level, they'll believe it. But if it's data, studies, science, they don't care. Asmongold's that type of person. A lot of his politics are based on anecdote, personal experience, and memes. He is not a hateful, awful human being, that's for sure, but he is politically not too far off from effectively being far right, because he is, at least at the moment, like a nexus of conservative thought and belief. Like he has been like boosting conservative accounts nonstop. His subreddit has become like a conservative politics gaming subreddit. Anyway, let's see how this went. I am dreading this, but I sped it up to 1.5 times speed, so it's not going to go by too slowly, at least.
Like you're talking about Martin Luther King. He also explicitly was against blocking transportation, and so there were lines even that he had.
Wait, Martin Luther King also participated in the Montgomery bus boycott. It's all good.
But yeah, I didn't want to derail your stream or anything. Or
No, not at all.
People.
My stream is a sequence of endless derailments in general, so.
So is mine.
Let me look something up really quickly. Yeah, blocking roads, by the looks of it, remains one of the most unpopular forms of protest, below property destruction and physical violence and threats. It's obviously below anything that involves physical violence or destruction, but blocking like public roadways is very unpopular. And I'm not saying this is like a moral mark on the pro-Palestine protesters, but I do think this is one of those bullets I think a lot more people in the rhetoric space need to bite. That there are some people out there who are engaging in actively destructive messaging for a good cause, for the attention it'll either bring that good cause or themselves. Like let's be honest. There's a lot of people who join into good causes like this to like virtue signal, and they end up being like the biggest disruptors and causing the biggest problems. Like during the BLM protests, there were like these middle class white boys who were like showing up, not really like having as much of a vested interest in the protest as the people that were there on like day one, and they were the ones who initially started throwing bricks through like windows and stuff. It really seems like you just gotta kind of be willing to bite the bullet on that kind of stuff. Blocking public roadways, not a very popular form of protest. Data that I have seen seems to suggest that it actually bends people more against the cause of the protesters than it brings attention to, and thus bring people like in favor of the cause. While not something I think that those protesters should be fucking run over for, arrested for, because they're protesting, and I think public roads are, like, I do think that public roads should not always be, like, roads, right? Like, the loss of public roads being a place that could be a public common space is, like, a big loss, I think, to humans as a culture in America, you know? But outside of, like, legally, and for the average person, it's not very popular. Blocking roads is illegal if they didn't get the permission and scheduled the protest. Yes, it is illegal. But like if you've got a big like group of people, they're gonna body block cops and stuff, and you know it'll eventually be a case of the cops like running through and beating the shit out of people who are just protesting, like they're just standing there. Depending on the state, like if it's Texas or something, the governor will call for the police to clear them out by any means necessary. And I'm directly quoting the governor of Texas, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, like, so I see what you're saying, kind of with like the guy entering the encampment, but I think that it's kind of problematic if people just get into a university and build like an area and tell people they can't go inside that area. And also, like in the video,
Xanderhall, to be fair, people were against the 1968 civil rights protesters, but they did not do roadblocks like that. Yes, they did. No, the civil rights movement, big time, did like literally city blocks blocked off from the amount of people. Like the 1960s civil rights movement, especially, and it's like the heat of it, was huge. There were cities that were truly just ocean of people in the streets, protesting, counter-protesting, cops blasting people. Like, yeah, it was huge. Yeah, no. There were a lot of very unpopular protest tactics used by the civil rights protesters, and it didn't change anything about the fact that what they were fighting for was good. And the fact is that in 50 years, 40 years, when this issue is a thing of the past and everyone looks back at it with hindsight, nobody will be talking about those that represented this side of the issue in a poor way. These people do not matter in the future. They will not be remembered by history, just like the people who did engage in less productive forms of protest during the civil rights movement are not remembered in history. Instead, we'll look back at the entire movement and we'll recognize it was an entire movement of people fighting for a good thing. Where it is most relevant is in the here and now. Back then, there were political comics describing the aftermath of like an MLK event as like a destroyed, burning city. Right? Because at the time, anything that they could find was used against MLK, and certainly against the entire civil rights movement as a whole. Nothing has really changed all that much, guys. We just have Twitter now.
It's hard for me to know whether they're really stopping him from the encampment. Because, like, I mean, and you know, you can look at it from my perspective, because you look at that video and it doesn't seem like there's an encampment behind those people.
Yeah, they framed it in a way specifically so that it would invoke that response from people that are unfamiliar.
So you think that, like, basically they filmed it from a direction where there aren't...
It's not that I think, I know. I was there.
Oh, no, when did you go there?
I went there 3 days ago, I think. And he was there actually even that day as well. He's been there every single day.
Yeah, they're talking about this guy who, he's like this little shithead with, like, he's got like the Zoomer cut, and he walks around with a, like a chain with a Star of David on it and like a blue polo shirt and a backpack. And he walks up to groups of pro-Palestine protesters and he demands they move aside because they're blocking the way to get to his classes. And if they move aside the first time, he'll go back around them and then approach them again and insist they move aside so we can get to his classes. And eventually they get to the point where they're silent and they're just like, we're not going to engage with you. We know what you're doing. And he'll have his friends record and he'll play out like, these people won't, I'm Jewish and they won't let me get to my class. I'm Jewish and they won't let me get to my class. And like the people there are just looking at him like he's crazy because this is like the third time he's walked in a circle after they let him through. And this time they're just like, no, we're not going to let you. And now he's trying to like make them look like they're blocking the way. I'm almost certain that's how he pulled it off too. Has anyone exposed him yet? Yeah, there are like there's literally a photo of him shaking hands with the cops. Here, let me see if I can find the image of him shaking hands with the cops. Campus agitator shakes hands with police. Oh, that was a good one. Holy shit. Never hold in your burps, guys. If you do, you can grow hair in your stomach. Anyone have an image? Anyone have a link to the image? I can't find it. I saw it on Twitter earlier today, and I'm not even going to try to find it on Twitter because I didn't like it. So now it's lost media forever. Unless someone else has it on hand. Come on, guys. No one's going to believe me if I just say it exists. Anyway, hopefully one of you guys can find a link to it. Please use the bookmarks feature, I beg you. I'm a boomer. I can't learn new things. I'm sorry.
So he's one of these broccoli-haired Zoomers that runs around and is like trying to use American foreign policy and active conflict to...
Hasan, fucking nail on the head. I hate Hasan and all that, but that was a banger take. I'm glad Hasan pointed out his obnoxious fucking broccoli Zoomer hair. Thank you. Fucking thank you. At least me and Hasan have something in common in regards to our mutual hatred for that shit. I'm so glad that Dracula Flow has popularized, or at least like brought to my attention, the term jit, which sounds like a slur at first glance. I thought it was a slur at first, but it just means like a kid who talks like a big game, swears a lot, and acts super edgy, and tries to get adults to think they're super hard and tough and grown up, but they're really just in over their head and talking shit. I feel like that word so accurately describes like half of the conservative Zoomers that you see, or like half the Twitter accounts you see on Twitter these days, like any conservative Zoomer you see, I feel like that term perfectly describes them. We need to popularize that. We need to get that going. Goes hard. I fucking hate the Zoomer hair. Me too. I really, really hate it.
To basically make TikTok laugh for himself. He's also worked with groups like Stand With Us, which is a group that directly gets funding from the Israeli government. So like he has worked with the Israeli government to do propaganda already. But I'm sure this is a great career opportunity for him. That's why he's been on Fox News. There's videos of him like trying to debate and agitate teachers that are near the encampment. Even Sky News called him a counter-protester and an agitator. Like he's like a known figure. This is not a random guy. That's also the reason why he is, at least for UCLA campus, he's the only video of like anyone even claiming the students are blocking people from going to campus. Because he's deliberately going up to the encampment in an effort to...
Can't you see, like, there's literally multiple ways to get around the people that he's claiming need to move in the video? Let me see if I can find it. Hold on. UCLA protest agitator. Let's see. Where's the dude in his blue polo shirt with his backpack and his Zoomer hair? Where is he? Here's the current state of the camp out they were having. It is a pretty big takeover for sure. Like, they took over, what is this, the entire quad? Maybe a little bit outside of the quad as well. Like, that's pretty much the, like, you can't even see beyond the camera. And this is a very wide image. That's why it's so fucking wide. And this is as much as you can capture in one single shot. They definitely took over a lot of area. I imagine it looked a lot neater before the police came in and, like, violently ripped everything up and beat them until they ran and arrested them. They were chased out of there. They couldn't have cleaned up or anything. I imagine it looked a lot less chaotic beforehand. Here's an image of that, by the way. A totally not insanely... Like, how does this not look like something out of like, I don't know, fucking Helldivers parody art? Like, we're bringing managed democracy to these wayward protesters. They're engaging in wrongthink. The Ministry of Truth has decided that their speech it's against the glory of our nation. We have to shut it down. They're using their First Amendment rights improperly. To be fair, though, there was violence happening. It makes sense. And they did kind of build a bit of a barricade type deal. Look at this. I think this is what Asmongold might have been referring to in that tweet thread when he said Rust base. Like they can't be allowed to build a Rust base on the campus. At this point, it does look a lot like they're actually trying to wall off people from accessing the school. Granted, it's the middle of the night, but it's a college campus, so, I mean, people live there. But yeah, this looks, you know, granted, this could be selective framing. This could literally end on, like, right beyond here, and you can just walk right through. Yeah. They were waiting, walling against police, blasting them. I assure you, nothing here would stop a 9mm round, okay? I assure you their chances have not been improved. Okay. What else? What else do we have? Can I find any more imagery from this that's, like, useful for this conversation? Because I want to be able to fact check on the fly about this stuff. I think that's pretty important. And I know that a lot of people are probably getting, like, a somewhat... If you're conservative, you're probably seeing nothing but, like the clips of these kids, like, destroying stuff or doing bad things. And if you're left-leaning, you're probably, like, seeing nothing but, like, clips of the cops beating them up. I think it's probably worth getting, like, some wide shots of what the general vibe is there. But everything is just, like, them fighting and stuff. I know for a fact that is not what was happening there the majority of the time, because there was lots of streams and stuff there. Oh, here's a good photo. I like this photo. This photo's nice. I think this is from earlier in the protest, a couple days ago. This is before the police came in and started fucking shit up. As you can see, it was not anywhere near as trashed as it was left by the police before the police came in and made them all leave. The hilarious thing as well is the Republicans' response is to immediately say, which image was it? I think it was this one. No, it's not this one. The one where it was like everything trashed, to say, and these are the people to claim they care about the environment. It's like, yeah, man, they totally should have like cleaned everything up as they were getting their rib cages like shattered by nightsticks and their eyes burned out with bear mace. They should have cleaned everything up on their way out. Absolutely. While handcuffed, the ones of them getting arrested too.
Try to get into the encampment to start fights. When I was there, a bunch of Zionist counter-protesters tried to do that as well. And the students were incredibly well organized, and they just set up a human chain to, like, they don't even like physically apprehend or remove people. They basically just body block them as though they're having a picnic.
Oh yeah, no, I saw that, and I think it was like 2 nights ago, not last night, whenever all this stuff got removed, but the night before. I mean, it was pretty obvious that like the Israeli or like Zionist or anti-Palestinian ones were the aggressors, and I think that that's a bad thing. I mean,
why is Hasan wearing an iron cross on his hat? That is what that is, right? Not the iron cross. The fucking. Is it like? I'm not wrong in pointing out that that's like an interesting choice in hat, right? It's the Templar cross, right? Which like I used to associate more with Assassin's Creed, but nowadays much less so. It's hard to just associate this symbol with Assassin's Creed Templars now when so many Nazi groups love this symbol. Wehrmacht cross. It's an iron cross, World War I era German symbol. Well, I'm sure it's fine. Hasan's not a Nazi. It's just weird. I mean, it's an interesting choice, okay? It's not an iron cross? Okay. It's just an interesting choice.
I don't think that the guy is in the wrong, though, for
Nazi,
being a counter-protester or even for being an agitator, really. It depends on how you define the word, because,
okay,
I mean,
it's a
that's
skater
just freedom
hat.
of speech, and I feel like that's what's fair, in the same way that it's fair for those other people to go and protest for Palestine.
Yeah, but the difference is, first of all, bear mace, or mace in general, is illegal to bring to protest, and he's like flashing it. There's another video of the students, literally, he walks up to them when they're gearing up for the cops to show up.
Yeah.
And the students say, we're peacefully protesting against the Israeli genocide here. Like, we see your bear mace. Like, please, you're making us feel unsafe. And he actually literally does not have a right to have that on him. And yet, that on that very same night, last night, he was over there.
Are you allowed to just, as a random civilian, bring mace onto a college campus? I guess maybe, but man, that's high liability for the college campus itself to allow that kind of thing on campus. I know for a fact they don't allow, like, weaponry, like guns or anything like that. So, mace, yes, in most states? Okay. Okay, that might not be the case. It's not? Okay. Thank you, Balth. I get it. I was just asking. It's possible that's an independent truck company, skate company hat. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I get it. The hat, funny hat discourse is over. Funny hat stunlock is done.
Dabbing it up with the cops and shit. The cops obviously don't give a shit about the pro-Palestinian encampment, especially because 2 nights prior, at this point, when the counter-protesters actually tried to enter the encampment,
I hope he's about to bring up the fact that, I think he is, the counter-protesters stormed the encampment and started attacking people and destroying shit, and the police took, like, hours to show up or to, like, move in, and then when they did, they pulled in Uvalde and just stood aside and watched, supposedly in fear, as the counter-protesters stormed the pro-Palestinian protesters' protesting camp. And then the police were just very ready to storm it and destroy it whenever it was time for them to move in and take down the pro-Palestine protesters. I think it's worth always remembering. You got your Uvalde cops, like cops during Uvalde, cowering outside, not doing shit, and then you've got your cops handling lefty protesters who are college students, and they're going in there and just going ham, no fear. They feel powerful.
came with weapons. They came with fire.
Why do we like the cops again? Like, cowards when there's a school shooting, but they beat up on college kids exercising their First Amendment rights. Man, no wonder we don't like cops.
Fireworks. They came with skunk spray. They came with bear mace.
That was like the day that because they were chanting the "Where were you?" Was this the "Where were you" moment?
I don't know what do you mean? Where were you?
Oh, yeah. I guess you were sleeping. Like last night, whenever it happened, like a lot of the protesters were like chanting at the cops.
Oh,
and
yeah.
They were saying, like, "Where were you?" Yeah. Okay. So like we're talking about the same thing,
Okay,
right?
yeah.
So
They brought it
the
up.
night
Good.
prior, the reason why they were chanting "Where were you?" last night to the cops is probably because the night prior, Zionist counter protesters actually stormed the camp and beat the shit out of some of the Palestinian students, like or
They were
pro-Palestinian
ripping up the
students,
camp, yeah.
with like wood pallets.
I watched it happen. I watched it happen live. It was disgusting.
Yeah.
Like I was kind of
They stormed
disappointed
it.
that the police didn't arrest any of them.
Yeah, the police came. The police actually came.
The police, yeah, they did. They stood by. The police stood by. They pulled Navalny and just stood and watched.
They did.
Yeah, and they stood by for an hour and 30 minutes in single file line formation while these guys were beating the out of. And these guys aren't even students. Like you can see it in the video. They're like, these guys are like adults. They're older. You know what I mean? They're like older than students.
There's also the protesters that are Palestinians that were identified as being older as well.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
it's hard
I
to
know.
like,
I'm saying.
Yeah.
No, I'm saying that like a lot of these guys, especially.
So you guys understand what I mean when I say Asmongold's politics are like brain worms. The worms are back. The worms are back. Asmongold's politics are Swiss cheese brain worms. I don't know how to engage because Asmongold will say, or Hasan just pointed out, people who are not residents of the college came to the college campus and proceeded to assault students or assault the protesters with 2x4s as the police did nothing. And Hasan, on a dime, responds with a non sequitur that is, well, some of the Palestinian protesters are identified as older and not students too. The point of pointing out that they are not from the school was not at that, like, they're not being from the school is the core factor there. It's that these are strangers coming to a school campus to attack students, primarily students, protesting on that school campus. You understand why it's so impossible to engage with people like this, right? They have a one-track mind. Like it's like playing Arma 2. Like they're locked on single core. Asmongold's brain, like the OS that runs his brain, is single-threaded. It can't multi-thread. It can only take advantage of one CPU core. So Asmongold he can't not have that kind of thought process where the smallest inconsistency he can find is immediately what his brain focuses on, and he just doesn't focus on the overall point that was just made. Genuinely, one of the most mind-boggling clips I've seen was what I just witnessed. Maybe you guys are confused why I was so surprised by that one back and forth, but that's what took me by the most surprise.
Really, the more violent ones have already been like identified as not going to UCLA, and they're basically return customers. So. And they're basically return customers at this point. It was a big point of contention with the students too, because UCLA was like, "Oh, we are going to take administrative action against the counter protesters for being violent," and the students were frustrated with that because they were like, "How are you going to do anything as an administration to someone who's not a student?" Because a lot of the counter protesters were not students. Like there were known right-wing figures and stuff like that amongst the counter protesters. Anyway, so the reason why the students were frustrated, understandably, is because they've demonstrated great messaging discipline so far. They are very, they're as limited in their disruption as possible. And historically speaking, campus-wide protests such as this one is infinitely more disruptive than what the pro-Palestinian encampment looked like. I mean, we're talking in 1968, they were taking, literally, students would go in during the civil rights movement.
Hold on, can I show you guys the lefties that or left-wingers? I just say liberals that are like cheering on Palestinian pro-Palestine protesters getting arrested here. Let me show you guys an image. Let me show you guys an image. It's in black and white, but it should look a little familiar if you've seen how things look today. But do you guys know who this is getting arrested here? Back in the 1960s, if I recall correctly, during the civil rights movement? Know who's getting arrested by the police here, dragged away as he smiles in defiance? That is a 19-year-old Bernie Sanders. College-aged Bernie Sanders. I imagine if this photo was in color, it wouldn't look too different from a lot of the photos coming out from these protests today. Much like they wouldn't look too different from the protests or the photos coming from the BLM protests of 2020. What a handsome devil. Yeah, he's a handsome guy. He's a handsome guy. People forget that. He's an old man now. You know, his looks, I wouldn't say he's like not a good looking like guy, but he's an old man, right? But he was a handsome young man, you know? I'm sure he got lots of pussy back in the day. Man's probably got like a massive body count, even for a dude who was like 19 in the 60s.
With guns and take deans hostage. In 1968 in Colombia, they took a dean hostage for like days.
Yeah, I know about that.
Yeah, they would literally just like shut off access for a dean from like leaving their room. They'd be like, no, you're not leaving. So historically speaking, people on the right side of history that we understand we're on the right side of history have taken way more radical and way more disruptive approaches to protest. So all things considered, both in the Columbia University, where they overtook Hamilton Hall again, just like they had done time and time again at Columbia specifically. That hall has a historical significance for student protesters.
My question is, why is there all this scrutiny for these student protesters that are like objectively arguing for like a reasonable cause? I mean, there are definitely ones among them arguing for like, there are definitely pro-Hamas people mixed within the crowd for sure. That's inevitably going to be the case. Like, where would the pro-Hamas people within America go to protest, like, in favor of or against Israel? Probably one of those protests. But I think they're pretty few and far between. I don't think America has a lot of pro-Hamas people outside of, like, LARPers on Twitter. These are people who are objectively protesting for a good cause against the killing of children. What is it? Like tickling the balls of 36,000 like innocent civilians? Or 36,000 Palestinians, most of them civilians, right? I think that's the exact like numbering, like almost 36,000 now. So then you look at like January 6th and what happened there, and I see from Asmongold, centrists, conservatives, endless amounts of defense and but they weren't all bad, but the political persecution, but you're just motivated against them politically. You guys have noticed that, right? How consistently they'll defend and find reasons to be charitable for the January 6th rioters, but these protesters, no charitability whatsoever at all. Bunch of mostly grown men in their 40s and 50s storming the Capitol, but a bunch of 19 and 20-year-old college students. No, those college students need to be beaten with nightsticks and fucking bear maced, I guess. The hypocrisy is just screaming in your face.
And also, especially at UCLA, where the encampment was like not even remotely disruptive, simply just taking on this massive lawn space where there's a lot of demonstrations usually. And building putting tents around it and trying to protect the tents from.
My understanding is the main reason they were protesting at UCLA, and this is like, if you're wondering, like it's very obvious why University of Columbia doesn't want like this protest happening and wanted this broken up. It's because the thing they were protesting was the fact that a sister school was being built in Israel. And Palestinian students who go to the school in America would not be allowed to go to that school because of Israel's immigration and like traveling laws around Palestinians. Might be Arabs as a whole, actually. Like if you are like someone of Arab descent, you might not be allowed, like even as an American, to go to Israel. I don't know what their rules are. I know that if you're like an American, you can get like a either really cheap or free vacation to Israel, because Israel has like a very strong tourism system to try to like get Americans to come visit Israel and get like a guided tour similar to like what North Korea gives in order to like promote more pro-Israel sentiment among like the average American. Like have a super cheap, affordable, nice guided toured vacation of Israel and see how amazing this place is, that you should really want your tax dollars to continue to go to funding the defense for, you know, like more Israeli defense spending. Yay. Don't you want that? Don't you want to protect this place you went on vacation to? And it was so nice. And we all expenses paid. It was the students needed an education visa to go to it, but Israeli students wouldn't need to get a visa to go to it. Ooh, okay, my bad. I misspoke. Apparently, Israeli students would be given preferential treatment. So it would be like the vast majority of students would be given would be basically discriminated against by the school but Israeli students would be given preferential treatment. That is the reason they're protesting. Outright endorsement of Israel, at the very least, is how you can interpret that from UCLA.
People coming in and it up. There are videos of counter protesters breaking into the encampment in spite of the human wall, the human shield, the human chain that they create. And as soon as they get in, they start throwing hooks, throwing bows, stealing people's tents, trying to break the tents apart and stuff. So that's the reason why they don't want to let in random people to protect the students, because they know the university won't do that. As demonstrated by the fact that they didn't do that when the counter protesters came and the cops literally stood idly by.
I do think that like whenever I watched it live, there was like crazy violence, and then once the cops showed up, even whenever they were in that line, the violence went down by like 95%. But I think that you're totally right that the counter protesters were like the agitators. They 100% were, and they were being violent. And to me, it was disappointing that I think the police didn't arrest more of them, because it was pretty obvious that the pro-Palestinian ones were the ones that were the victims in that situation.
Yeah, but they ended up arresting only the Palestinian, like the pro-Palestinian side. And the night prior, they didn't actually engage with the counter protesters.
Is that true though? They only arrested people on the UCLA arrests. Is that true? 200 arrested. Do we know, like, how do we know what groups were part of the, like, side that were, how do we know who is part of what side? You and Vosh still cool, Zan? I think so. I think he might have a little bit of Biden derangement syndrome, though. Hundreds arrested as police dismantle UCLA camp. Police moved into the pro-Palestinian encampment at UCLA, smiling tents pushing out protesters in a clash that lasted hours. The operation capped 2 days of upheaval on the Westwood campus that began when UCLA declared the encampment unlawful and continued when a group of pro-Israel counter-protesters attacked the camp Tuesday night, with police taking hours to stop the violence. Early Thursday morning, officers wearing body armor, helmets, and face shields methodically pulled apart the barricade as protesters tried to hold together the assemblage of plywood and metal fencing. Police launched flares that arced over the encampment, igniting with piercing blasts, and smoke filled the air from fire extinguishers that demonstrators sprayed at police. At least one officer is seen on video shooting rubber bullets into the crowd. Many protesters left on their own, but others were arrested. Los Angeles Police Department officials said 209 people were taken into custody. Many were booked on suspicion of failing to disperse, a misdemeanor, a law enforcement source told The Times. By mid-morning, students, staff, and other protesters had begun trickling out of the jail in downtown Los Angeles, carrying plastic bags filled with their belongings and yellow citations. As they left the jail one by one, they were greeted by cheers from students and legal advocates across the street. Many chanted Free Palestine as they emerged from the building. Ella, UCLA sophomore who declined to give her last name out of fear of retaliation from the university, said it had been an exhausting and disappointing night. You know what's really fucked up about this too? The cops were like unmasking the protesters that were wearing masks, and this like, I get that, like, if they're getting arrested, they have to be unmasked, but it was almost done in this, like, ceremonial way. Like, it was really bizarre. Hold on. Let me see if I can find some clips. Well, here's someone who... Yeah, this is posted by one of the accounts that's super pro-free speech, as you can imagine. America First account posting, "Unmask every one of these terrorist fucks." And the police did exactly that. The reason why this was pointed at the Fox News cameras was so the Republicans and the conservatives would have specific faces to look at and to criticize and to potentially connect to a name and an identity. There's no other reason to unmask them in the way they do here. Watch this. Pointing them at the camera. All right, you're in place in front of the Fox News camera. Let's zoom it in. Take the masks off. All right, your face must be seen by national television. It's practically doxing them. It feels, not necessarily, but it really does feel insidious, you know? Like how this is like some sort of, like I don't know, some kind of ceremony of unmasking these people to Fox News for all these conservatives to freak out at and call them terrorists and say unmask them all. Why do you think all the Republican accounts want all these quote-unquote terrorists unmasked? Sorry.
Until until they were setting off fireworks and launching them directly in the encampment. So the question is, why are they picking a side? Because they've arrested hundreds of students, both at Columbia University, both in CCNY. What's up?
You mean why are the police picking a side?
Oh, the police are picking a side, and it's not the side that is the violent side in this situation. It's the side that's peacefully demonstrating. In my opinion, a direct violation of First Amendment rights. I don't even personally believe that protesters are supposed to, protests are going to be disruptive. Some of those protest movements you might not agree with, or the tactics you might not agree with. But
the fact is, how disruptive or violent a protest is really irrelevant to whether or not the thing they're arguing for is good or not. I don't know why we on the left have allowed the conversation to circle around so much if you believe a thing is a problem and you support making that, solving that problem, then inherently you must make excuses for or support or bite the bullet on the behavior of anybody else who also supports that movement. So, I don't believe that, outside of conversations like this, the fact that there is violence or could be violence at these protests matters to the overall conversation. It's really more of a rhetoric and optics thing. Every protest and movement, the bigger it is, the more so will have violence. It's just a natural outcome of getting a lot of people together. You have a concert, there's going to be some violence. You get a big bar or event or something, there's going to be violence. You have a big fucking Comic-Con, there's going to be some violence because lots of people put together all together means that naturally over a period of time along the x-axis at some point there's going to be a spike in the amount of violence between people that occurs, or property even, right? It just happens when you got a lot of people put together, together in a place. And the idea that those instances means that the ideas they're protesting for are not valid, which is essentially Asmongold's argument. He's trying to pick apart the ideology, the belief system that Hasan has of progressive thought, being in favor of protesting in any way these type of injustices. He's trying to pick that apart, but the problem is that's not how well people go about protesting these things has no bearing on whether or not it's a real problem that needs to be solved, or whether or not these protesters have a point. Hilarious that there tends to be more violence at right-wing rallies than left ones. Always statistically true, yes. The problem is left-wing rallies and protests tend to have more property damage, and property damage is a lot more you can just find a bunch of clips of people knocking over trash cans and lighting dumpsters on fire, and there you go. You got your perfect optics poison. But when it comes to conservative protests, one guy kills another person, and that's just seen as one bad apple, even though someone fucking died, So the right can very easily just sort of snake their way out of responsibility for the fact that the average right-wing protest is full of Nazi flags dotted about.
Ultimately, the way I look at it is they were the perfect victims in this situation, even though I don't expect them to be perfect victims. And yet, even after all of that, they were still met with violent free speech suppression from the state.
I don't know if it's really free speech suppression, right? Because they're not really getting arrested for protesting. They're getting arrested for putting a bunch of tents on the campus whenever the campus tells them to leave.
Yeah,
I mean,
nobody ever gets arrested for protesting. That's just
this. It's partially true. Nobody does ever get arrested simply for protesting. You get a permit, you go through the process, and you protest. That typically doesn't result in the cops coming and arresting you unless you've gotten violent or destroyed stuff or stayed past the allotted time with the permit for taking over some public environment. Generally, though, protests that are big enough and rowdy enough with enough reason to exist, if people are emotional enough about the issue, will naturally lead to some level of violence at some point. Or some level of rowdiness. The police are going to act sooner than later, and the police getting involved in the way they do here usually results in more violence. Like, this was very famously the case back during the George Floyd protests. You guys want to see a great example? Police bash reporter during George Floyd protest. Can I find this clip easily? I've shown it on stream a couple times before. During George Floyd protest. God, these were all over the place. A lot of Now This clips. I don't know if I can show that one, though. Oh, yeah, it's this one.
We've been fired at with rubber bullets. My cameraman...
Hopefully this one doesn't get me copyrighted. This is from an Australian news outlet, I believe, or maybe New Zealand. Right now there's a reporter speaking over a microphone and a cameraman next to her that we're seeing the POV of. And these are all protesters kind of holding a line and the police holding a line with their fucking shields. This is back during 2020. Watch what happens. This is not an unexpected outcome from the police escalating the situation. The police, more often than not, their presence, if they're not there to help like they should have been when people stormed the protesters with 2x4s and started attacking them, then they're doing this.
We've been fired at with rubber bullets. My cameraman has been hit. We've also seen tear gas being used. Here we go, they're moving through again. This is exactly what it looks like. Exactly what it looks like. We're just staying safely.
Oh.
Whoa.
This is live.
Oh.
Amelia, can you hear us?
Amelia, are you okay? Or your cameraman? Hello, Amelia. The police just charged at Amelia and our 7 News cameraman there, and looks like a policeman just
immediately pushed the camera out of the way.
Which is interesting because they're not discriminating between protesters and the media here. Amelia, can you hear us yet?
Amelia, are you there?
It's like everyone forgot about this when, like, unanimously the news media had, like, fumble over their words as they watched live footage of their, like, reporters getting attacked by the cops and had to find a way to talk about what they were witnessing live happening to their reporters as the cops, like, attacked them and indiscriminately tear-gassed and maced and like, hit them. Like, had to find a way to like, not just say, holy shit, fuck the cops, you know? Like, they're, like, stumbling over their words to not say something about the police that'll get them fired because they're just watching as the police plow through, like, a crowd of people indiscriminately and beat the shit out of their reporters. Like, countless news organizations had like, situations just like this, and it was live. These are live reporters. This all happened live. No way of cutting it off and, like, editing and preparing a statement. These people had to act on the fly, reacting to what's happening and finding a way to not just sit there silently and awkwardly, and not being able to just say, man, the cops suck.
Are you okay?
Yes, I am. You heard us yelling there that we were media, but they don't care. They're being indiscriminate.
This is a different video than the one I was thinking of. During that push, I think, there was another film crew where the cameraman gets, like, stomach bashed 3 times in the gut by a cop with his shield. Like, some shit out of... You know that one, the Falcon and the Winter Soldier show? Where John Walker, I think his name is, uses the fucking shield to, like, cut that guy in half. Basically trying to do that, but vertically to a dude with one of those plastic riot shields. He was a cameraman. He was holding a big, like, clunky mainstream news camera. And it's just full footage of the guy getting, like, his stomach bashed by a riot shield as he lays up against one of those metal fences. Because he can't go anywhere. The cops got him pinned. Like, it's fucked. People forgot what was going on just 3 years ago. What the police were willing to do when the left got too uppity with their protests 3 years ago.
Just, that's not a thing. Everybody always, when states, like in Russia or in China or whatever, when people are, like, getting arrested for protesting, the state, of course, makes up, like, another reason for it there as well. They'll be like, oh, trespassing, you know what I mean? Obstructing.
What do you think that's unreasonable?
Do I think that arresting someone for protesting peacefully is unreasonable? Yes.
Well, do I think that, I mean, I think a better question is that if you own a property, like, should you have the autonomy to decide who's on that property?
It's public property. So they're both they're both not arguing too well here. Asmongold actually made a pretty solid argument, actually. The argument of where, like the only thing these people are being arrested for is illegally being in a place. Like they set up, it was an unlawful gathering. And that is the same standard that was applied to Charlottesville, right? Like, I think most of us can agree that when the police determined that Charlottesville was an unlawful gathering, which was before people were dying, that it was fine for the police to start moving in and dispersing them and arresting people. But this is the same standard that is applied to every other protest. The cops themselves obviously have their bias, and it's clear here, but the law there is clear. If you are unlawfully gathering, it doesn't matter what side you're supporting, you're breaking the law. And the cops can come and arrest you or even use force to move you out of the area. And these are not private properties. These are public properties on the side, like to respond to Hasan. Rarely are people protesting on private property. Like, even when they're protesting a random person, they usually aren't like out on the lawn of the person protesting. They're usually out on the sidewalk in the street, in the public area.
Well, in this circumstance, it's literally public property because it's UCLA.
Yep,
UCLA is a public school too. So that
good response
that
from Hasan.
ultimately changes the dynamic a lot. It depends on what the property is, though. There's like private property, like someone's house, right? I don't think that people should come to your house and protest it at your house. Like that's
well, I mean, they do. It's just they protest from like the sidewalk or the street, which is public property. Because if they step onto someone's private property, depending on the state, I mean, the person could come out with a gun and lawfully shoot them. I mean, like I'm pretty sure it's depending on the land and where they are. That's allowed in a fair amount of America.
very different, like disrupting your life and violating your privacy and safety, versus protesting in the middle of a public space at the school that you pay tuition to is perfectly valid in my opinion.
Well, everybody else pays tuition too. I think it's kind of unfair. For example, some people that pay tuition are locking other people out that are also paying tuition from the same services that they're both paying for.
So you bring up a good point, right? Like you're saying, this person also pays tuition. He should be able to go to any space he wants to, any place he wants to on campus, which is correct.
I mean, like, I'm sure there's a few exceptions, but yeah, generally.
Yeah. So obviously there are many exceptions, not just a few. Like, you know, UCLA campus is very famous. They shut off certain parts of the campus for filming and stuff like that all the time. The difference here is that this is a broad, open public space that these students were already occupying. And the reason why they're not letting, like, they weren't disrupting class. They weren't stopping people from going to class. The university, as a matter of fact, is the reason why the other buildings that were in the surrounding area were shut down. I talked to the students when I was there, and they stated they wanted to go to the library, for example. It's across the green area is across the way from the library. They shut down the library during midterms so that these guys' lives would be harder, so that they would have a harder time studying. They shut down the Wi-Fi so that students that are on the encampment would not be able to use it. Try to make this protest as hard for them as possible, which is normal. I don't think that that's a good thing to do personally. I think it probably goes against the values that UCLA espouses, specifically. Ironic because like a lot of these campuses literally have like super woke terminology in their studies. Like USC literally doesn't have genocide studies. They call it resistance to genocide studies. So
oh boy.
For me, it's like if you're taking that extra initiative.
That's not a good argument on Hasan's part. You can hear from Asmongold's voice, him saying, oh boy, is like a negative. He's responding negatively to that information. He's not hearing that argument and thinking, oh, Hasan made a good point about hypocrisy. He's thinking, oh man, they're teaching kids about resisting genocide? That's some woke-sounding shit. How is that a class? Guarantee you that's what's going through his head right now. I promise you that's what's going through his head right now. One thing you have to recognize about like your average conservative-leaning or even centrist conservative-leaning person like Asmongold is they're very against like education as a whole, you know? Like Asmongold especially hated school, which, fair. You know what's really ironic about this, though? Like, as an Asmongold fan, I can kind of pull from some background knowledge I have of the guy to make fun of him here. He talks a lot when it comes to political issues about how he wants law and order, and if people are breaking the law, it's bad. But, here, let me see if I can find the clip. It's funny as shit. I think this is the clip, maybe? Yeah, here it is. Here it is. It's hilarious to me that, like, Asmongold tells stories like this, but at the same time, he's all about law and order and by the books when it comes to protesting.
I thought about being a police officer for a while, but I just, I saw that they had to get up early, and so I kind of pieced out on that one. And I was actually talking about that to my dad. This was in 6th grade, and I was filling out my classes for middle school. And my dad, he sees that I picked out criminal justice and to be a police officer in 6th grade. And my dad had never done this before, and he never ever did this again. But he made an executive decision. He says, "Son, no, you're not taking that class." And I said, "Oh fuck."
His dad just called him. His dad's watching the stream.
Hey, Pa, go ahead.
Yeah, you gotta correct it.
All right.
Yeah, before you ever even saw the list of classes, I looked down there and I said, okay, there's only one thing on the list you're not gonna take. And it was the cop class, the junior cop class. And you said, what? I want to take that class. I said, there's no fucking way. We are not cops. We're the other guy. You know?
We're the other guys.
That's the family tradition.
It's a family
Yeah,
tradition.
so you're not going to be a fucking cop, ever. And that was out. Okay?
I very much understand that now. Yep,
Remember that?
I remember it all too well. You finished the
That's one of the best Asmongold clips ever. When Asmongold's dad comes onto the stream, it's really top tier. That quote, "We are not cops, we're the other guys," goes crazy.
To be extra woke on the aesthetic front, you should probably not be surprised when your students learn the actual lessons that you're teaching in these classes, which is that you should resist a genocide, right? So the fact that the university turns around after teaching them about many different genocides that have happened all around the world, and then tries to do everything in their power to make it as annoying for these students as possible is a little hypocritical, in my opinion.
It is hypocritical, but it's also something that's driven by the protesters' actions. And the protesters are doing that, and the result of them doing that is the university shutting down those places.
I hate this implication that for any movement to be valid or to be warranted to exist, then the group must be perfectly well behaved as a whole. We have to break the trend of what happens when lots of humans gather in one place in order for any movement to be seen as valid or any protest to be seen as valid, because if anything uncouth happens, then the entire point of the protest is now thrown to the wayside. The argument basically being that a civil Nazi protest is a more valid protest than an uncivil anti-Nazi protest, which, to be fair, is exactly how these people operate. Hell, even an uncivil Nazi protest, they'll find ways to justify its civility. And when you question them on this hypocrisy, they'll say, well, it's more important to protect the freedom of speech of those that you disagree with, because if you stop protecting the freedom of speech of those you disagree with, and that's a slippery slope to no freedom of speech. But they'll completely disregard any idea that it could also be a slippery slope towards giving people who are anti-freedom of speech the platform needed to destroy freedom of speech. It never applies equally on both sides with these sort of center-ish leading people, or center-ish leaning people. I can't speak today. What the fuck?
And also the university, and you can correct me if I'm wrong about this because I'm not really sure exactly. This is just what I've heard. I thought that about 2 days ago, the UCLA said that the protest was unlawful, but before then they were basically kind of not addressing it or not calling in the police to do anything. Is that right?
No, they actually did call the police, but they called the campus police specifically to protect the encampment. I was actually kind of surprised at the university's actions at that time, because they knew that there were a lot of counter protesters that, in comparison to Columbia, for example, which had literally called the police against the encampment in Columbia University.
Yeah, I saw that.
The UCLA campus actually had sent police to line up around with their backs to the encampment. And that's not just symbolism. That actually means something, right? When you send cops, white cops.
Nice.
I mean, if the university is allowing it, then really that's the end result. I mean, they're the ones that make that decision. It seems confusing to me that, based off of the logic that they're trying to shut down the the library or the Wi-Fi, but they're also having police come in and protect them. It seems very confusing. What are their goals here? What are they trying to do?
Well, ultimately, their goal is to get the students to shut up and go away and stop bothering the administration to make these moves about divestment. I don't know if you're familiar with what the goals of the student protests were, and every campus is different, but specifically the UCLA one I can speak to.
Is to divest, yeah.
Yeah, it's to divest from UCLA.
Divest, provide full transparency, end the silent, boycott, abolish policing on campus. I don't know about abolishing policing on campus. I think that's actually a pretty serious and important thing. boycott, end the silence, provide full transfer. I don't know what, like, a lot of these are kind of like vague, but I do feel the divest. I think the reason why people are just saying divest is because that's the most like coherent, like solid point, you know? Like, abolish campus policing. A boycott is basically the same thing as divesting. So, like with Israel. So, I don't know. End of silence? Is that the same as providing full transparency? I don't know. Yeah, I feel like overall, the argument being made is that UCLA shouldn't be, like, backing Israel in the way that they are, which is currently they're making a sister campus location that is going to, like, provide preferential treatment to, like, Jewish and Israeli students while, like, giving non-preferential treatment, I guess, like discriminatory treatment towards everybody else. Yeah, pretty fucked up. That's pretty fucked up. I think UCLA has a fair amount of money invested in Israel overall. Yeah, it's just, there's reason to be protesting if you're a student at this school and you pay tuition and you don't support what Israel's doing. It makes sense that you would protest. Your parents or you are giving your money to this school, more likely your parents. And you know, if you're not wanting your family's money going to supporting that, then you should protest it. That you're in your right to do that in America.
UCLA, the UC system across the board is a massive endowment, and that endowment basically works like a mutual fund, you know, and they're investing in a lot of corporations, and the students want to have financial transparency in what corporations the university endowments are going to, like what corporations they're investing in, which is perfectly valid, perfectly reasonable demands to make. As a matter of fact, a lot of companies have done this. A lot of people have done this successfully, demanding that people divest from oil and gas companies for like environmental activism. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah, it's been going on a lot. And just for the record, like, I totally support them protesting against that. Even if I agree or disagree with it, it's their right to protest against that. The only concern that I have is whenever it shuts down other students' ability to learn or get an education, or for people to use the facilities in the way that they're intended to. Yeah. Whenever you talk about the actual, like, intent of the protesters, I totally support them. Absolutely. Or even the counter-protesters, because that's freedom of speech. I think that, you know, if you don't have...
God, he went from, like, at least having a somewhat charitable position towards the movement of the protesters to immediately has to correct himself and say, I also support the counter-protesters, the ones supporting Israel. It's like, okay, man. Because I'm pro freedom of speech, and I'm a total centrist. The problem with centrism is that the right wants there to be centrists, while the left can't abide by there being centrists effectively, right? Like, someone who's a centrist is someone who is not willing to typically speak out and act in regards to a political issue. And historically, and I think this becomes more obvious the further back you look and the less, you know, contentious the political topics and disagreements are in today's standards, there have been those that want to sit in the middle ground and do nothing. There have been those that want to either make things more regressed or keep things as backwards as they are. And there are those that are the progressives that want to progress things. The people who want to progress things need support. They need people that are on their side to achieve their goals. And that will always be true. If you are progressive, you need people on your side backing your ideas in order to achieve your goals. But if you're a conservative, if you're somebody who wants to regress society, you don't need people to support you. You just need a lot of people to not care. You need a lot of people to just not be actively fighting you. So while the right the right just needs people to, at the very least, not be on board with the left. While the left can't abide by people not being on board with us. You know, like we need support. We need people to be like advocating for good things. But someone like Asmongold, who actively defends the idea of being a politically disaffected nihilistic centrist, that is what the right needs. People who convince others not to care about shit, because the right thrives when the average person doesn't give a fuck what they're up to in politics. And that is why there will always be a natural contention between left-wingers and centrists, because centrists are the fuel to the conservative fire. In fact, there have been writings from people such as MLK going back decades and decades about how centrists, the white moderate, are effectively worse for the political discourse than the Ku Klux Klansmen and the white citizens councilmen, because at the very least those people will stab you in the front. Meanwhile, the white moderate, the centrists, will tell you to just wait, to sit back and wait for a better date. I don't quite agree with your chaotic and violent way of advocating for justice. I prefer a negative peace, a negative justice, which is an absence of violence and strife, than a positive peace. You know, a positive justice. I forget the exact wording, but yeah, the whole white moderate thing has been around for a very long time, and Asmongold falls into the exact idea, and I hate it for him. I really do. I'm a WoW fan. I miss when he was like, you know, the WoW guy. Anyway, if you agreed with anything I had to say or you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like. It really helps the channel a lot and basically electric prods YouTube and its algorithm into pushing my content and my channel and the algorithm out to more people, and it really helps a lot. And of course, if you haven't already and you want to see more from me, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell icon to turn on all notifications so YouTube actually tells you when I go live or upload a new video. And of course, if you want to support me financially, which really, really helps considering, you know, I don't take sponsorships, I'm a fan-funded content creator, we're all grassroots in this bitch, then please consider subbing, donating, or gifting a sub on youtube.com, on my YouTube or my website, xanderhall.com/live, or supporting me through YouTube, Twitch, Streamlabs, StreamElements, Patreon, or buying merch through my Streamlabs link down below, which I don't really make a profit on, but I do like seeing you guys buy me Xander Hall merch. It's funny, and it's cool, and it makes me feel like a real YouTuber, you know what I'm saying? And of course, if you haven't already, make sure to join my Discord server. It's totally free. It's the hub of my fan base. We do call-ins, watch parties, game server events and stuff, and I do all my announcements for new uploads there, so you'll never miss anything. It's totally free, so I hope to see you there, and I hope you enjoyed this video.